evening and welcome to Writers in Conversation. I'm Carole Burns, Head of Creative Writing at the University of Southampton in England, and I am thrilled to have Gish Jen with us, the American writer, today from all the way from Cambridge, Massachusetts. As much as I would love to be in the same room as you all, sipping a glass of wine or a cup of coffee, the magic of the internet and the necessity of this has given us the gift of having Gish Jen here from Cambridge tonight. And there she is. Thank you so much. Here, Gish.
I have to confess one thing though, Carole.
Yes.
I'm not actually in Cambridge right now. I'm actually in northern Vermont.
I forgot temporarily for that, didn't I?
Yes. I'm normally in Cambridge, Massachusetts. You were absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And,
well, I can tell you.
I'm only holed up here because of COVID.
Well, I can tell you from the UK perspective, Vermont is even more exotic than Cambridge, Massachusetts. So
it's pretty cool.
So Gish has been writing fiction for more than 30 years now, exploring the American landscape while also ranging across the limits of genre and tone. Her 5 novels and many short stories are literary and entertaining, funny and serious, personal and political. From the immigrant family of her first novel, Typical American, published in '91, to the grandmother in the title story of her collection, Who's Irish, and now in The Resistors, to the young girl who wants to be a baseball pitcher, though perhaps not at any cost. Gish creates characters who explore not just what it is to be American, but what it is to be human. Her most recent novel, The Resistors, which she'll be reading from and talking about tonight, is also many things. It's a baseball novel, it's a Bildungsroman, it's a protest novel, it is dystopian, and at the same time, hopeful. In a world beset by the failures of today's governments to tackle problems, climate change, inequality based on race and income, automation and privacy, we are told the story of a young woman who may or may not, I won't give away the ending, become a resistor. So Gish, you're going to start us off by reading from the beginning of this novel.
Yeah, I actually thought I'd read 2 short sections, one from the very beginning and one from a little bit farther on that gets into why this book is about baseball. So this book, as you may know already, does involve a resistor family. It's a father, a mother, and a daughter. It's told from the point of view of the father. And they belong to a class of people called the surplus. This is a post-automation surveillance state society, and so there are many people who do not have jobs. They're the surplus, and other people do have jobs.
Gish's internet connection in Vermont's a little sporadic. So I'm sure she'll be back with us in a moment.
They're associated with the kind of on the.
I'm sure she'll be back.
Oh, but could somebody come back? But you know what? I'm going to.
Yes. I'm sure. We just wait a moment. It was perfect when I spoke to her earlier in the month. And for the last 10 minutes, so I'm sure we'll be back in a moment. Well, let me show off the book while we're waiting. So this is the book that she's talking about. It came out just about a year ago, and it has been acclaimed in the New York Times and the Washington Post and all sorts of places. And so really, it's really wonderful. God, I can't get the left, right of cameras right. It's a really wonderful book. You can find an extract from the opening in the New York Times website. And there's also another extract in LitHub if you want to take a peek. While I usually do this at the end, but I'll take the opportunity to do this now, we have in about 5 weeks' time on March 15th. Margot Livesey will be here this time actually from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Margot happens to live there as well. She'll be talking about her really beautiful book, A Boy in a Field. And she is, Margot is a professor at the very famous Iowa writing program. And she is Scottish. She lived in Scotland, born in Scotland, raised there before moving to America. It looks like we have Gish coming.
I'm so sorry. You were just, that never really happened. Oh no. And I just had my husband come in from his run so that he can stand by, and if anything can be done, he will do it. But I'm afraid it could be weather related or something. So anyway, we'll do our best.
It seems like it's better now. So
oh good. Well, don't knock on wood. Let me quickly read, and I will keep it short because we'll try to get through it. Anyway, this is from the beginning of the book. It's the father of the story. The book is set in the future, as you will gather. And if you have any questions about what's going on, you can ask me. But anyway, let me start reading. As her parents, Eleanor and I should have known earlier, but Gwen was a begin with. Special. She had jaundice. She had things that I can now see distracted us, especially with the one chance policy. We were focused on our health to the exclusion of all else. For the netted, it was different, of course. But for us surplus, the limit was 1 pregnancy per couple, and Eleanor was just out of jail. Outside the house, she had a drone minder tracking her every move. The mess is clear. She was not getting away with anything. And in any case, we loved Gwen and would never have wanted to replace her, worried though we were that she was delicate, that she might never consume the way she needed to, the way we all needed to. Not that charges of underconsumption couldn't be fought in the courts. This was Auto America, after all. For all the changes wrought by AI and automation, now rolled up with the internet into the iBurrito we called Aunt Nettie, we did still have a constitution. And if anyone could defend what was left of our rights, it was our own fierce Eleanor, of whom even the platoons of Canada geese who patrolled our neighborhood, the pit bulls, one might say, of the waddling world, were afraid. But as Eleanor's incarceration brought home, these battles had a price. And in the meanwhile, even worrying and weighing the options distracted us from realizing other things we might have noticed a bit earlier had Gwen had a sibling. It is so hard for a new parent to imagine a child any different from the one he or she has. Children do so have their own gravity. They are their own normal. And so it is only now that we can see that there were signs. All children take what's in their crib and throw it, for example. It's universal. But Gwen threw her stuffed animals straight through her bedroom doorway. They shot out, never so much as grazing the door frame, and they always hit the wall of the staircase across from her bedroom at a certain spot with the precise force they needed to bounce forward and drop clean down to the bottom of the stairwell. Was she maybe 2 when she did this? Not even. Although she was already a southpaw. And already she seemed to have unusually long arms and long fingers. Or so I remember remarking one day, not that Eleanor and I had so many babies on which to base our comparison. Ours was just an impression, but it was a strong impression. Her fingers were long. I remember, too, having to round up a veritable menagerie on the landing before I could start up the stairs. The stuffed hippo, the stuffed tiger, the 3 or 4 stuffed dogs, the stuffed orca and toucan and platypus and turtle. I gathered them all into my arms like the storybook zookeeper of some peaceable kingdom. It was as if I, too, ought by rights to be made of plush. Of course, our house was automated, as all surplus houses were required to be by law, and the animals could just as soon been clear-floated. All I had to do was say the word, and the house spots would emerge from their closets, their green appendages poised to help. Clear float now? Aren't those animals in your way? And we can roll and clear if you prefer. You have a choice. You always have a choice. the choice business being a new feature of the program, a bit of cyber ingratiation, you might say, to balance its more habitual cyber intimidation. If you trip, it will be your own fault, for example, and do note that your choice is on the record. Nothing is being hidden from you. Your choice is on the record, meaning that I was losing living points every time. Living points being something like what we used to call brownie points when I was growing up, except that these were more critical than money, for everything from getting a loan to getting a plane ticket to getting Gwen and Jeanette you one day. Should we dream of doing that? A goal that people said involved tens of thousands or maybe even hundreds of thousands of points. But I picked the animals up myself anyway, as did Eleanor when it was she who came upon them, her silver hair and black eyes shining. And all because we wanted to dump the animals into Gwen's crib ourselves and hear her quick, cresting laughter as she immediately set about hurling them again. Everything was a game to her, a most wonderful, loving, endless game. Her spy eyes lit up with mischief, her tea brown cheeks flushed to hot orange pink you see on the underside of clouds at sunset. Often she laughed so hard she fell as she threw, plopping down on the soft bottom, but grabbing the crib rails so hard as she scrambled back up that the whole crib shook. Was this the delicate newborn we had once so anxiously tended? Now breathtakingly robust, indestructible, it seemed, she wore an old-time soft yellow blanket sleeper with attached feet and bunny ears, and had knit extra warm version of a suit Eleanor remembered from her own childhood. None of this baby zone heating over Gwen's crib, in other words. Gwen hardly seemed to need zone heat in any case, having learned so early to blow on her hands if they were cold and to cuddle with us if she needed to for warmth. Indeed, we were all given to cuddling, and we all wore sweaters too, to avoid turning on the zone heat, for which we were constantly house scolded. Don't you find it a bit chilly? And why not choose to turn on the zone heat? You'll be more comfortable, Eleanor especially. Don't you find it a bit chilly? But we ignored it. For this was how the Otter House started, wasn't it? With thermostats that sent to Aunt Nettie for SCADA, then videos. Then came drone deliverers and fridge stockers, kid trackers and robo-sitters, elder helpers and yard bots, all of which reported to Aunt Nettie as dutifully as any spy network, recording our steps, our pictures, our relationships, and back when we soon to the surplus still had them, our careers. And she, in turn, took what she knew and applied it, even proffering along the way solace and advice. Indeed, in the early days of automation, I myself brought up Ask Aunt Nettie more often than I care to recall, and can still remember her consoling voice as she volunteered, "I'm here," and insisted, "I want to hear everything," and reassured me, "Of course you feel that way, Grant. How could you not? You're only human." I did laugh at that. You're only human. And now, I was just going to read a very short section. A very short section from a little later in the book. Gwen has turned out to have quite a pitching arm, so that those animals that she threw out of her crib were quite an indication of things to come. And later on in the book, she's become this pitcher, and she's getting ready to pitch for the Auto-American team in the Olympics against the Stein Russians. And her teammates are all terrified of the opposite team because they've been genetically improved, and that means, among other things, that they are all switch hitters. Perhaps all this was fear, pure and simple, on the part of Gwen's teammates. But feeding their obsession, of course, was the sense that baseball was more than a sport, that it was a crown jewel. There were people who said it wasn't even invented in America. There were people who pointed out that it was mentioned by Jane Austen long before it was mentioned here. But if baseball took on a hallowed meaning, it took on that meaning in our American dreams. For was this not the level playing field we envisioned, the field on which people could show what they were made of? And didn't we Americans believe, above all, that everyone should have a real chance at that? Didn't we believe that with the good of the team's heart, something in us might just hit a ball off our shoe tops and send it sailing clear out of the park? If Gwen's teammates were playing Time Rusher for something like that, it was for this. For a chance to show, my mother would have said, that even if we all returned to the dirt and the wind and the rain, like the plants and the animals, we had a bigness in us, something beyond algorithms and beyond upgrades, something we were proud to call human, or so it seemed to me. And I'll stop there.
That was a wonderful choice of extracts, Gish. That was just great.
Well, thank you.
I feel with that.
Position myself in the middle of your screen.
Sorry, no, that's good. Yes, for a while we only saw one eye. I'm glad to see both eyes now. Oh, the fun of 2020, 2021, right? Things we never thought we'd do. So I feel with that last section when you talk about baseball and the level playing field, you're like calling on our better natures. Life shouldn't be so unequal. It's that, and there's so many things you talk about in this novel: climate change and income inequality, and at the same time you open with this besotted father. Talk about these various inspirations that drove you to write this novel.
Well, I'm a besotted parent. I think that's pretty obvious. I did sit down to write this book when my daughter went off to college. So it was 2017. I'm an empty nester for the first time. And I sit down. I have to say that because, I'm an empty nester, I thought, I can write about anything I want, And but what do I write about? I don't write about, girls having a great time, in Paris or anything even slightly like that. I sit down to write, about anything. And I find that what's really on my mind is, of course, the future. Of course, partly that's because my daughter is entering the world, and I'm concerned about that world. Partly, every citizen in America in 2017 was pretty concerned. So we're 10 months into the Trump presidency, and it was very clear already that we had a lot to be thinking about. I think it's not surprising that the word Constitution appears on page 1 of this book. This never happened to me in a book before, but you can see what was on my mind. And you can only imagine that as a mother with a child going out into this world, I am looking around and thinking, holy moly, climate change. Holy moly, we've had problems with income inequality all along, but it's now a lot worse. In this book, as it's really almost an apartheid, situation that they have there. The two classes are so far apart. That was just the logical extension of where we were, where we are, I should say.
Yeah.
If we go on the way that as we are going now, that's where we're going to be in 40 or 50 years. People say, "Oh my God, you're so imaginative." I'm thinking, it actually doesn't take a lot of at all to imagine that we could end up in a state like this, especially once you throw in technology. I think that the way in which, technology, you can see my whole ambivalent relationship with technology. And that, I too would love to have a house that self-cleans,
Yes.
I do a Roomba. I love the Roomba. I am, in favor of all these things. They really are just wonderful. And at the same time, I'm also aware of the dangers, and especially the dangers of surveillance and the danger posed by automation. Again, it's not just that automation is a danger, it's what we do with the automation. Like in this book, instead of using automation so that everybody can work a little less, instead we turn jobs into something that only the privileged people have. The other people don't have any jobs, and unfortunately that does seem to be kind of what we do when we have a resource. Instead of thinking like, oh wow, we've developed this thing that can benefit us all. Instead, we immediately make it into something that only the privileged can access, and so so anyway, all those things were on my mind, and they all made it onto these pages, as well as the tremendous hope that I can see in the young. Not just, the kids. Well, look how they came out. They came out in the last election. They're organizing. The younger generation is as savvy and prepared as they come. Do you know what I mean? It's like I think that in earlier generations, maybe the young were a little asleep as they could afford to be, because they're so protected. This generation gets it, that there's no protection for them, that we boomers are leaving them quite a mess. And they get it, that there's no coasting, they get it, that they need to be in gear and they got to think about what they're going to do. And so, so there's a lot of hope. My book is a dystopia, but it's kind of utopia at the same time, Mm-hmm. It's kind of both. And the resistance movement that arises is not the America that we actually have today, but it's the America that we hoped that, that we wanted to begin with, right? Mm-hmm. If we use metaphor, baseball or sports as a metaphor, it's baseball very famously, it reflects all our greatest ideals, but all our problems are there too. Even today, it's unbelievable. It's Satchel Paige, who, is a way in which my picture is sort of seen as kind of a female Satchel Paige. But Satchel Paige, very, very, very great Black pitcher, one of the greatest of all time. I don't think there's any disputing that. But in his time, he learned to pitch in a reform school, and he played in the Negro Leagues, and he was only admitted to to Major League Baseball this year, like a couple of months ago. It's surreal. It's kind of surreal. So when we talk about racism, you could sort of say, well, I don't know, is this so racist? You can argue till you're blue in the face, but when you look at what's going on in baseball, it's very apparent. Not to say it's sexism. And, of course, I'm very aware of that as well. And I think it's only this year that we have a female manager of a baseball team for the first time. That happened like 2 months ago, Lane King of the Marlins, but really there's no reason that women could not have been managers all this time. It's not like something happened to women where suddenly we're qualified. That's just not the case, and there have been some phenomenal female pitchers that, people don't even know who they are. People like Mamie Peanut Johnson, Mamie Peanut Johnson. She could really throw, 5 feet tall. I always love it because she's, very petite. So I could always relate to her. An African-American pitcher, 5 feet tall, throw like the Dickens. She weighed 105 pounds in her uniform, sopping wet. And but none of these guys, they never had a chance, to play the way that they should. They never had the chance to show their stuff the way they should have. And so I'm aware of, sort of aware of all the limitations. But of course, in my book, the girls get to throw.
Yeah.
If they can throw that ball, they get to throw.
Yeah. So you had this, political context that you were responding to, and you had your daughter off. You're an empty nester. So that's like a situation. How did you create? Do you remember how the story of this resistor family and Gwen as this fabulous pitcher came to be?
I really don't, I think that, it's because I was sort of out to have a lot of fun. Because I felt like, here I am, I'm an empty nester, I can do whatever I want. I think that in some ways I picked the thing that was the most far-fetched, how could I write a baseball novel? Get real, right? Just really. And once I got into it, I thought, oh my God, like what have I signed myself up for here? And I think that it seemed like the greatest possible look, and it seemed like it's just going to be a lot of fun. And that's all I really remember. You know what I mean? And then I thought, but of course I have all these concerns about America. So I was aware that this was a great American metaphor, than Tom Whitman, it has the snap, go, fling of the American atmosphere, or as Spaceman Lee of the Red Sox put it, it's the belly button of America. So I was aware that I was writing about the belly button of America, but also, but I don't, and I remember early on the idea of a girl with a golden arm, just kind of came to me. Mm-hmm. I think in some ways it's like, I don't know, you kind of, there are feelings that you have about like your children, your own family, but they've got to be displaced. They've got to go someplace that clearly it's not your child. It's like, my children do not play baseball. They have never, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think my daughter's ever picked up a baseball bat or a baseball anything. I don't think she's ever thrown anything in her life. And she is very good at many things, but baseball was not one of them. I don't think it's ever crossed her mind. And then I think somehow that made it an arena of freedom for me. Do you know what I mean? So because I could write about things that worries that I had about her, worries about her being out in the world, worries about what it meant to be a girl, and also celebrate her very great strength, but not be writing about her. Do you know what I mean? And so somehow this girl with the golden arm just came to me. I don't know how. And once I thought, oh, a girl with a golden arm. Well, that's kind of interesting. You know what I mean? And anyway, there it is. And the next thing I knew, I was writing these baseball games.
So I want to remind our audience that we love questions from you. You know me, I can ask questions all night, but we'd love to hear questions from you. So we'll open that up at any point. So just stick them in the chat and our host will forward them over. So in the meantime, you read a section tonight. You ended the first section in one of the quotes. I was going to quote back at you when one of the quotes tells Grant, "You're only human." You know, meant as an insult, but it isn't, is it? Isn't this novel about what it is to be human and to
Well, you know, one of the things that I'm concerned about is technology, as I was sort of saying, and and I mean, I'm worried about jobs, obviously, and there's good reason for that. I mean, I was in a World Economic Forum workshop not long ago, and so I'm looking at their little 2-pager intro, for all the workshop participants, and and the number that they threw out there for projected job loss, at this moment, by McKinsey, the great consulting company, is 450 to 800 million jobs lost by 2030. Like, that's a staggering number. So there's a way in which, of course, I'm worried about, what automation could mean, and people think it just means truck drivers. It means a lot more than truck drivers, I was just reading an article about models who are being replaced by, models who are absolutely gorgeous, of course, and much easier to photograph. And I mean, also they can generate personalities for them, and they also have causes, just like, Angelina Jolie. Yeah. So, I mean, you think about it, so even someone like a supermodel, could be replaced by AI. It's a lot to think about. And so you see a lot of those kinds of concerns in my book. But of course, part of that is going to be, well, what does it mean to be human? I mean, so much of what we've done with ourselves as humans is kind of just figure out how to survive, And so what happens if that's taken off the table? And what do we stand to lose if we go ahead and in a parallel between technology and raising children, what do we lose if we give technology nothing but freedom? And we put no boundaries on them, the same way we would like to do with our children. Well, no, I mean, the same problem that they have, which is like, well, we want Gwen to have her freedom, but what if she uses it in a way which is really terrible for her? Parents worry. But of course, a much larger worry than any parent might have is the parent, is the worry of what if we just let technology just do whatever it wants to do, and we do not regulate and we do not control. Well, what's going to be? What happens if we've designed our own replacements? Is there something about humans? A lot of people are saying, well, humans aren't so special. If you go to MIT or something, a lot of places they're discussing these things. Well, what's so special about humans? Actually, humans have done nothing but screw up. You know what I mean? Is there something lost, really? Or what if we're greatly augmented by machines? So what? When we were just like an interim, we were just an interim development, and in evolution, or is there something else? And so this this book is trying to get at, well, what, is there, as Grant's mother puts it, is there a bigness in us? Is there a bigness in us that we would do well to keep in mind as we think about what we want technology to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. We have a question from Sam, and who is wondering, do you have any words of advice for aspiring young writers?
I have more than a few. I have more than a few. The first thing, of course, is I wonder if are we talking about fiction writers?
I would think so.
Yeah.
But Sam, you can correct us if that's not right.
Well, I will just say that I would guess one thing I would say is that obviously you must find whatever it is that you were put on earth to write. And there's everybody has something, and it might not be very long, really. It may take you a long time to just write that very short thing that you were put on earth. But I do think that everyone has something they were put on earth to say, and you must try to focus on trying to say that thing, and also you must accept that some things were given to you and other things weren't. You know what I mean? And it wasn't given to me to be Alice Munro. I would have liked that very much, but I wasn't. It just wasn't given to me. But you have to kind of accept that, So I guess that would be the first thing, And then I think with fiction writers, I would sort of say, everyone talks about language, and language really matters, but story matters. You know what I mean? I would keep my eye on the story. People are just like, I love that image, and that's great. I'm not anti-image, but when it comes to fiction, story, looking for story, and that's we have a very, it's an interesting thing. We have a big hunger for that, and I do think that storytelling, and storytelling that is unique to you is this, is really important, as opposed to storytelling that, which is what, Netflix wants you, stories that Netflix wants you to tell. I think it's important for us to tell our own stories. Yeah, I guess.
So, Gish, what were you put on earth to write then?
Oh, well, I do think that for one thing, as you can sort of see, I think that I am put on earth to write a lot about the American project. I do. Well, I think because I'm the daughter of immigrants, so I come from such a different worldview. I mean, the worldview of my parents was so different. And I think, well, maybe not just America, but about culture. I think I was put on earth to see culture and to write about culture. Because there is a way in which, no matter where I am, I see the culture I'm in. You know what I mean? And I can see that it can be completely otherwise. Do you mean, to me, it's not like nothing is necessarily natural. Like I understand that none of it is natural. I understand that culture is, it's a very brilliant thing that we humans figured out, culture. That we figured out that we could learn things, and then pass them on to the next generation. And that great adaptation has enabled us to live everywhere from Antarctica to the equator, right? Humans can live everywhere because we learned to pass on knowledge. But it's also true that we evolved to kind of internalize that knowledge and not just sort of, because it would be most effective, of course, if you only accept it as natural, right? But now in this more globalized world, actually a lot of that internalizing of culture that was so adaptive for so many millennia is now, surpassingly unadaptive, maladaptive. And so I think that it's, I think that I was put on earth to look at culture, to write about culture, to think about how to change culture, and to try to shape culture from my very privileged vantage point.
You do a great job of it.
Yeah, I try.
So we have a question from Jack. When writing on such worrisome subjects, how do you engage in the dialogue between your narrator and the world you create? How much does perspective enable you to explore these ideas?
Perspective is everything, right? Perspective is everything. For instance, if I took too objective a perspective, I would spend all my time explaining this world, which would be so boring, right? So you need the narrator who is both moved to kind of explain things, but who's actually in things and is in a story, and the story is already going, right? So he's got, he can see what it is. He can imagine an audience who doesn't know what it is, that, doesn't know what a living point is, doesn't know what zone heat is. Can you imagine, he's living in the world. It's like, can you imagine? People don't know what a house spot is. So, he has a little bit of the built-in tour director in him, but not so much that he stands in front of every single thing and says, and now this is a house spot. So that's, I guess that's a question of narrative distance, right? From the world. So the answer, so he's a little outside the world, but not too outside the world.
I always thought it was interesting too that you had Gwen's father narrate it. Gwen, we wouldn't get the slightly larger perspective of the parents who've been around for longer. And if it was her mother, well, she's so much in the midst of it, like almost too close to it. That Grant is a good, almost like he's not as far away as Nick in The Great Gatsby, but he is a little bit further away than Gwen and her mother.
Yeah, and that was partly, and just as you're sort of saying, in order to narrate in a certain way vis-a-vis the events, and also because I did have these two larger-than-life characters. It became apparent to me. So I have this larger-than-life picture and a larger-than-life lawyer in one book. And then, that's quite, as you know, as a writer, that's actually quite a challenge technically, because, when we read The Great Gatsby, we believe that The Great Gatsby really was this larger-than-life figure. But Fitzgerald made us believe that. And Gatsby himself had arrived and said, I am this larger-than-life figure.
Yes, I am the Great Gatsby.
So not so Great Gatsby.
Yeah.
And so similarly, I really couldn't have I have this phenomenal picture, and who could convince you that she really was this phenom? But somebody who was watching her from that moment in her career, he's discovering it, so it's so real to you because she doesn't just walk onto the stage, you see her, those first moments, she's like throwing her animals out of the crib in this extraordinary way. And, the father's like, wow, like, is this normal? Like, cause I don't actually know any other kids. So, to me, I'm not that loud, but it just seemed a little strange. And, her fingers are very long. But you need somebody who was kind of, who's close to it, but who also thinks, wow, that's amazing, and especially since I had two figures like that. And also, I needed kind of like a normal guy, a regular Joe. I needed a regular Joe in there somewhere.
Yeah. But it's interesting though, because it's the women who are the bigger characters.
Yeah. And I guess, once I realized that kind of as a family of three, the idea of having this woman looking up to her son and looking to up to her husband, that was obviously, So it became the husband who looks up to these. He himself actually is quite a quantity and is a wonderful force for change and quite a resistor himself. So it's not like he's just there to reflect their glory. But he's a less extraordinary type. And also I, not to give too much away, but as he has no father. He only has a mother. So he was born, his mother had him with who needs them then. Yeah. So he's kind of an unusual guy that way too.
Well, I love his mother's voice as well, who comes in as this kind of, old sage type, old fashioned wisdom. But it's a really nice when that voice comes in. She always says the right thing in a way, or he remembers the right thing. It's another interesting tactic that you use, strategy to enrich the novel.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting thing. I'm interested, as you know, in sort of the way that we are not just, selves, who arise out of nowhere. We come out of contexts, and I'm always interested in larger context, including everybody around us, but also the historical context,
Yeah.
So, Grant is a resistor himself, but he comes from he comes from a tradition. He comes from a family that were resistors before him. And he remembers. He remembers what his mother said. And I have to say that part of it just seems very true to life to me. In other words, I think do remember things that our parents said, and that those things live on. And that, and it gives us great satisfaction when the things that we remember are connected to the things that are going to come after us. I think that when we feel that tremendous sense of something, having been given to us, and that we are then giving on, it's one of the great delights of being human, and that's not something that humans do, by the way.
Yeah. Okay, from Jessica. Do any of the protagonists of the novel hold a special place in your heart, or do you resonate with any of the characters? And if so, why?
Well, probably they just like Flaubert would say, she would say, "Metaphor," say, "Moi." It's I would sort of say all the characters are both me and not me. You know what I mean? Of course. Maybe a little bit closer just to Grant and Eleanor, just the parents, just because I am a parent myself. And I could understand all their anxiety and their desire to make the world better. I really admire Eleanor. I don't know if I identify with Eleanor. She's like much nobler than I am. But maybe she's some projection of some idealized self. You know what I mean? If only I could be Eleanor in my next life. I'm afraid I'm more like Grant.
I think I'd want to be more like
tinkering.
Well, hardly true. Let's see, from Luke. Since there are many jobs at risk of becoming automated, do you think that creative jobs, which are maybe more difficult to automate, will become more valued or be in greater demand?
It's interesting. I don't know that we're going to go on. I think that capitalism has been a tremendously successful system. And I don't, and I mean that quite honestly. I've lived in socialist countries, and I get it. It didn't work. Whatever you think about it, capitalism has been the most successful economic system that we have managed to develop. That said, it could be that we will move to a post-capitalist society, thanks to automation. And I'm not sure what will matter, how things are valued. You know what I mean? So I'm not sure that creative work will be any more valued than, in the sense that you get compensated for it, but I'm not sure that it will matter. What is true is I do think that creative work is the work that they will not be able to automate. And they can, and I do think that they will be able to write, op-eds, they will be able to imitate certain voices. They might be even able to kind of, generate original voices. But and especially voices that are popular. In other words, they'll be able to figure out like a model that everybody thinks is beautiful. They will be able to figure out what would be popular. But I think that in terms of divergent voices, whose appeal cannot be readily described, and whose appeal and whose strength is not measured in votes or popularity. Do you mean can't really be measured by an algorithm as strictly qualitative and not at all quantitative? I think that those voices will turn out to be the thing that's left. Do you mean? So, it's going to be the books that people would write, even though they weren't going to sell 100,000 copies, the Thomas Piketty of the world will still sit down and write their books. And they'll be able to write those books. And I think that they will see, like I say, I don't think anyone's going to pay them for it any more than they do now. But I do think that they may be recognized for what they are, which is to say, emanations of the human spirit that actually machines cannot replicate.
Mm-hmm. Because they're not only human.
Because we do have a bigness in us, I do believe.
Yeah.
We have a bigness in us, and they can replicate all kinds of things, and they are replicating, and we are the originals, and we will have diverge, and there's no way of maximizing, because it's strictly qualitative. There's no way of, you know what I mean? There's no way of maximizing and producing a Beethoven. Yes. I think that you can maximize and produce a Super Bowl ad, that I'm sure you can do. Do you know what I mean? I think sonata is a whole different thing, and I think they'll have a lot more. I mean, and they can write those too. You know what I mean? In other words, actually, I should say that. I actually think that they will be able to write them. But the sonata that will turn, the musician that will totally upturn all that, or do you know what I mean? It's just like I don't think they will be able to do it. I don't. Not literature. I don't think so.
Yeah. Okay, another question from Poppy. Now this is a potential spoiler question, so she's asked it very carefully. So see if you can answer this without yourself. She's wondering if you could elaborate on why you chose the fate for Eleanor that you did choose.
Oh, interesting. Well, I don't want to give too much away, but I will say one thing. She's quite at odds with the state. So she is someone they are very much trying to winnow. And as they say, they definitely want her out of there. So that's one thing. She does come in for a lot of special treatment, as distinguished treatment, as they put it. And so that I don't think that's surprising that she would be targeted. And I don't know if that's enough of an answer.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of subtext there that those who know the fate can get. Yeah, thank you, Poppy, for being so careful in your question. Let's see. Another question about the book being, heavily features a dystopian theme. And I thought, is this your view of the future, or are you quietly hopeful? I think you're quietly hopeful.
I think I'm quietly hopeful. I mean, I think that, as you gather from some of my comments about culture change, I actually feel that even though, we are very given to being quite asleep. Do you know what I mean? As humans, we love to kind of sleepwalk. However, some things do wake us up. I think right now, a lot of people are awake. And I'm not saying they won't go back to sleep, but at the moment, many people are awake. And so, one writes a dystopia not because one hopes that this is what's going to happen. One writes it's part of raising the hue and cry. It's the wake up call. It's the wake up call. So it's my job to make people think. So hopefully, if you read my book, you're in a position to sort of say, well, should we just let technology run rampant or not? Hopefully you'll remember, I read that book, The Resistors, maybe we should regulate some parts of it. I'm hoping that light will go on. and ditto for, what could happen if you have, like an apartheid-like state like this, is that going to be stable? I read this book, The Resistors is actually not so stable. So you may think that's a good idea, but it's probably not the best way to arrange society either. And I guess it's sort of said that even as I write with really quite a dark pen, obviously the reason I am writing this way is to help wake people up. And, and you don't have a wake up call unless you actually think that people can be woken up, which I do. I mean, I think that in good times, we don't spend your time worrying about every bad thing, But at the moment, I think it is a time for everybody to be, on their toes and paying a little attention.
And the book, after all, is called The Resistors.
It's time for people to resist. And it's not just the Trump administration here in the United States. I think there are other things. There are a lot of forces which are fundamentally dehumanizing. Mm-hmm. And I do think that it is, it's important to sort of stand up and sort of say, well, technology, society, economics, these things we invented. We invented them. You know what I mean? They're not like they didn't come to us from outer space. We invented them. We can reinvent them.
It was one of the really wonderful. We read this book in one of our modules here, one of our classes. Mm-hmm. I was very pleased. One of my students pointed out that it's not the non-humans that are treating humans as if they're not human, but it's humans doing that. Which kind of related to the point that you just made. Yeah, it was a first-year student. I was very.
Yeah, but that's wonderful to hear. I wish I'd been there.
Yeah. So there's a question that you've answered a little bit already, but I do want to ask it from Jessica. And that was, again, about what inspired you to write the novel from Grant's perspective. Or maybe you can think about how would it have been different if you had offered Gwen's version of events, her iteration. Yeah.
Well, actually, there is a little section that I did write just before this book came out. The Week in Review in the New York Times, which is the big end of the in the Sunday section. So they had this big thing, and they had a special section that was fiction about dystopias, about technology, and they asked me to write this piece, and it was the lead piece. It was on the cover. It was very, very exciting. It was a huge, huge thing, and
it is very exciting.
It was quite something. Anyway, and I did write it from Gwen's point of view. So if you want to know what it would look like from Gwen's point of view, you can easily look that up. It's in the New York Times. It's very easy to find. I think it's called "Tell Me Everything." So it's a bit about Gwen and her relationship, to Aunt Nettie, who was, kind of a confidant and interested in everything you want to say. Do you know what I mean? And how seductive that is also. Do you know what I mean? So, I think we're seduced by the, the convenience, the fact that Aunt Nettie, can do so much of our work for us. But also, it's this tremendous seduction of a voice that's been coached to be endlessly interested, to say the right things, to offer the right advice. Grant feels the seduction of that voice, and Gwen does too, anyway, you could that part. It's anyways. If you want to know what it would be like from Gwen's point of view, there it is. It's online. You can look it up.
Well, that's wonderful. Yeah,
I've actually written a sequel as well. I will say that's from the house's point of view. Yeah, so that's coming out with originals, and that'll be out. I don't know, a couple months. It's an editorial now, and that's from the house's point of view, and kind of how things seem to the house. It's sort of really more focused on the house and on Woody. Some years after this, that was kind of yet more, yet farther into the future, and again, it's about the relationship between our desires and technology. Do you know what I mean? And I don't want to give it away. It's not even in production yet.
How wonderful! And it's what is it? Do you have a title?
Yes, it's a novella, and it's called Otter House.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
And
so
you were trying to do that, or how did that come about?
Well, in this case, honestly, I had a novella that is actually in this new book that I have coming out, and I had shown it to Audible. They had come to me asking for something, and I sort of said, well, actually, I do have a novella length thing that was going into this new book, and so I showed it to them, and they really wanted it. So that was the good news. The bad news is Knopf refused to let them have it, and so there was this argument about it, and Knopf refused to move. I thought it would be great. It's like great. It's like kind of like a, like a for cereal, right? Have that's out of the world. You like this, then you write, then buy the book. I thought it would be great. No. They were against. So that left me in kind of a tight situation because I didn't want Audible to be incredibly mad at me, and I couldn't give them this other novella. So I had to write something, and so it's amazing what's born out of desperation. I had to write something, and then I thought, well, maybe I'll write a novella. Everyone's been asking for a sequel to The Resistors. Well, maybe I'll give it a try. You know what I mean? So, So anyway, so I wrote a little novella from the point of view of the house, and it was a lot of fun. I have to say.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question.
Never taken the cleaning.
Another question from. It looks like it's from Blue. It says, maybe slightly political, but do you feel a little more hopeful now that Biden is president? He at least seems to care more about climate change by rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, for example.
Yes, it is a tremendous relief to have somebody who is not a climate change denier in the White House. Not just for the United States and for the world. It's just an incredibly dangerous situation to have somebody who is in denial I mean, as I don't have to tell you, the ice is falling into the ocean every day. The ice caps break up, and this is going on, and you have somebody who's going to do exactly nothing, and that's terrifying. That's just So Biden, as you probably know, has a science advisor in the cabinet level science advisor. That's very good news for the whole world.
Yeah,
truly.
Yeah. Okay, we have another question from Jack. How did the idea behind your short story, Who's Irish, come about? And what about the story made it ideal for the short story form?
About the what? I'm sorry, I missed this.
What made or the form of the short story? What about that tale from Who's Irish? What made it a short story, I suppose, as opposed to a novel?
I don't know what made it a short story. It was a short story.
Yeah.
I don't know why. And again, I don't mean to sound too mysterious about these things. I don't really know where they come from any more than we know where our dreams come from. You know what I mean? It's like you wake up and you say, oh my God, so-and-so was my dream, but so-and-so wasn't anything like what they were in life. I think, Carole, it won't be news to you that, I think our best ideas arise from our subconscious, they're kind of shimmering in this funny way. They have a little bit of the uncanny about them. And that's how you know that you're actually saying something which is not what happened, but, that meant a lot to you for some reason. It's resonating in some important way. And anyway, it's kind of resonating that way. It's bubbling up from your subconscious. And I don't know. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. And I don't know why some things are shorter and some things are longer. I don't know. But I will say that, it has some origins in life in the sense that, I'm married to an Irish American. His name is O'Connor. And so, I do know a little bit about that Boston Irish world, And I know the ways in which it's, kind of very different than the way the Chinese immigrant world. So it wasn't hard for me to imagine the differences. And also, of course, I do know that, many of you who know that story, that the grandmother does hit the child. And, for better or for worse, I grew up in a world where that was just normal. That of course kids are hit, which I have to say is actually true in most of the world. I mean, people who, especially if people teach that story to a classroom of immigrants or immigrant kids, they all start laughing and they talk about like what they were hit with, and some of them were hit with pans and some were hit by belts and some were hit by shoes, but they were all hit. And and they all think it's really funny. I mean, I think the from your average kind of Cantabrigian who's been come from where their family has been professors for the last 4 generations, they're a little shocked. In their minds, nobody that's child abuse. But these kids are all like, oh yeah, my grandmother hit me with a whatever it is, and they think it's really pretty funny. Or, they think it's just part of the world, it's just like, well, maybe if I hadn't, let all the chickens out of the chicken coop, maybe I wouldn't have gotten it. I shouldn't have done that, I guess. I haven't done it since. Funny. Anyway. Well,
and also, as well as, there's intercultural differences that story is exploring, but I've also really loved the intergenerational differences it's exploring, because that's, and the grandmother in there and the love life, and in this book, they're both, they're often right about a lot, and it's an interesting dynamic that I think one of the things that you explore as well.
Yeah, they are. It's in this case, this grandmother is a lot more benign. I mean, she's not at odds with Grant, and she would love Eleanor. You know what I mean? She would love Grant. So there isn't this kind of tension. But it's true that that older, especially an older woman, is often willing to say the things that are kind of not polite, that would be perhaps useful for some people to know, and and they don't, they just tell it like it is, frequently.
And you need people like that in fiction, don't you?
Well, it's it's funny how it ended. You immediately brought that up. It does. In the end, the novel is so much about telling it like it is. Like that is our job. Not the way we want it to be, not the way that, we're not the Super Bowl ad, you know what I mean? So this is not, this is the way it really is. And there's something, there's something in us that kind of jumps a little bit, in a good way when we see the world as it is, or somebody just says something and you say, oh my God, well, actually that's true. Yeah. And we like it. We like it when we read something which is true.
Yeah. Okay. Another question from Luke. You've said in another interview that you're often writing against something, and that as a person, this is very irritating. Is the writing process irritating? And how do you get yourself through it?
That's interesting. When I talk about writing against something, the person that I often quote is Philip Roth, who talked about having an amiable irritant. He said he would never get to his desk if he didn't have amiable irritants. And I do see that, so because I'm a writer, if something happens in the world, which is sort of irritating, part of me thinks this is irritating and partly thinks, well, there may be a story there. And if it's very irritating, it may be a novel. So, I am both. In that way, I'm a little bit like the cultural psychologists will do that too. When they think about what to study, when something makes them really irritated, they think, it makes them really irritated, think, oh, there's something there. What is it? And I see paper, and it was very similar. Similarly, I often think, oh, I see a story, and so the answer is that there is an irritant, and but in the case of a writer, it's often a welcome thing. So an example of that would be, when my daughter was born, I had this girl, this biracial daughter, and she had blonde hair. Very fair hair for most of her childhood. And we had a German nanny, Julia Brundtland. And she actually looked like a model. She's a dead ringer for Julia Roberts. Oh my God, you can only imagine living with this creature in our house. And so everywhere we went, Julia Roberts was carrying my daughter around. And people would look at me and they would immediately think, of course, that I was the help. And they would ask me, well, do you have any free hours? I'm like her mother. What do you think? Anyway, and that was the kind of amiable irritant, that of course I got the love life out of that. Do you know what I mean? Of course I got a novel out of that. And it's true in a general kind of way. As I sort of trying to discuss earlier, we have all these structures, these social structures, and we see them as natural. But then things happen like that, and then I feel. Is that natural? It's quote unquote natural that the little Asian one should be the servant. That's natural. It's my job to sort of say, well, stop right there. You know what I mean? Stop right there. And this is a place where our culture's a little bit off. And it's, and luckily for me, I have a job where I can actually do something about it. So it is both, obviously, if it weren't irritating, obviously I am irritated.
Still.
3 hours, of course I'm irritated. That's the bad news, but it's also the good news.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And because I'm a novelist, I get the last word. I'm sure they'll ask me that every time I'm an interview. I'm sure if they ever hear the interview, I'm sure they're just like, "Oh my God, that was me."
That's right.
How embarrassing.
So you talked about the importance of story earlier. So, well, who are some of the writers that you would kind of think of, or not imitate, but try to learn from, who you thought were really, really good at story?
Well, of course, there's a lot. All the greats are good at story, right?
Yeah.
Right. They're not, Chekhov. All these guys are good at story.
Yeah.
And I myself recently, I was very influenced by Shakespeare earlier on. Mm-hmm. And, and like many people, I think that I kind of, did all my Shakespeare in high school and then, went on and kind of advanced to Henry James, But more recently, and I think you can kind of see this in the book, I think that literary work has gotten too literary. I think that, I don't think we can we'll put it this way. I don't think we can afford to be so literary. We're losing our audience. We're writing ourselves into a little, you know what I mean, a little hole where the only people who want to read us, you know, are all our students and our friends. And we all agree it's brilliant, but unfortunately nobody else really cares. And I think that, you know, I mean, it's probably kind of some kind of natural cycle where it becomes more literary and then it comes back and becomes more popular again. But, you know, but more recently I've been sort of thinking, you know, there is a way in which I think that that I myself am interested in return to bigger, broader strengths, you know, and the same way, you know how Shakespeare is, you know, look, of course he's, you know, he's like in competition, you know, across the way people are watching, you know, bear baiting and, you know, and hangings. And there are other older. He's got a lot of competition. You know what I mean? So he has to have people being blinded on stage. You know? I mean, all this kind of stuff, right? And there's blood everywhere by the end. I'm not going to have blood everywhere, but there's a way in which I sort of feel like, you know, we've gotten a little narrow, and you know, we don't allow those kind of big dramatic things. You know, we've been taught in workshop that, you know, oh, you know, you want to be melodramatic. Well, you know, life actually, a lot happens in life, actually. I mean, in other words, I think that we're so kind of like every time something big happens, like, oof, you know, you want to kind of shy away from it. And more recently, you know what, I think that it's time to recover some of that boldness. And like, I think partly I feel that partly because of where we are, you know, where the literary world is, but also partly because now that I'm older, oh my God, I mean, what goes on in the world is, you know what I mean? I mean, honestly, there's, you know, it's a lot more than, you know what I mean? And then he said X, and I realized in my heart, why? You know, I mean, a lot of that goes on, but a lot more goes on. I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, a lot, like, yeah. Big things happen. And as you can see, you know, in terms of the national stage thing, I mean, you know, rioters do overrun the Capitol. You know what I mean? As you know, there are riots in the Capitol in my book, as you know. But you know, you know, those things that seem like, well, that's a little much, right? You know, and another day we were, but actually, you know, big dramatic things do happen, and I don't think we should shy away from them.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Let's see, we have one possibly last question from our audience. You've kind of answered this, but maybe you can talk about it a little bit more. Would you say your own experiences of being treated differently due to your background is a driving force in how you write your characters?
Yes, it's good. Yes, absolutely.
Different take, yeah.
Absolutely, but I will say it's partly extra. You know, I mean, I think that you know, there's just no question that, you know, especially in America, you know, we have a lot of problems in the way that people are treated, and you know, even as we speak, you know, little Asian American 90-year-old Asian Americans in Chinatown are being beaten and thrown to the ground. I mean, you know, unbelievable things happen, and they're just racist and bad, right? But in addition, I think that I have been driven by a sense of, you know, being treated, you know, in unfortunate ways by the world, but also of cultural difference, you know, of internal difference, you know, of having grown up in a culture where things are very different. And I will say, you know, even though the dominant narrative in the Western America is always just like, well, clearly that was the bad way, and very happily you have, you know, ascended into individualistic America, and you learn to be like us, lucky you. And even though they just want to hear this triumphal story of just like, and I'm so glad. I am very, very glad that my parents emigrated from China to America, and I cannot imagine I would survive 5 minutes in China. And I do not support authoritarian government, and I'm sure, you know, I feel delighted by all the ways that America has allowed me to become this. I mean, I'm just having this amazing life, and I'm very grateful to America for that. That said, I do come from a different, you know, I have a different self in me, the base self. I mean, I have both. I mean, I am a hybrid. I'm not one or the other. I'm in the middle. And I can, you know, and I have quite a quarrel with American individualism. You know, I do think, I mean, I don't, you know, certainly it's at the heart of why I've been unable to control COVID, you know, in this country. I mean, there's a lot of big downsides, and I know I'm all in favor of the upsides, the innovation, and you know what I mean. And just even things like how casually Americans get to dress. I am grateful that in America, anything goes, especially if you're a writer. Don't worry, you're never made to wear uncomfortable clothing under any circumstances, you know? So I'm very grateful for all that. That said, I also think that there's a lack of empathy, a lack of respect for other people, a lack of awareness even of other people and you know what their needs might be, and you know what they might have to say about themselves. Just the idea that you should be sensitive to others is really not a dominant American ideal, which is extremely important in Chinese culture. And also, as you referenced earlier, you know, an awareness of the generation ahead of you and the generation behind you, the upcoming generation, you know, the sense that actually you're not the be all and end all, you know, you are beholden to the people around you. They are beholden to you as well. You're beholden to, you know, to the previous generations. I will say that every time I say something like that, because I mean, I'm very aware, like even in America, you know, women 20 years ahead of me did not get to write books, you know? I mean, I get letters all the time, you know, thank you so much. And, you know, in my day, X, Y, and Z. And funny, I was sitting in Radcliffe Yard with a fellow writer who was telling me that she just, you know, she was just tired. She wanted to quit, blah, blah, blah. And I just said, you see these windows here? You know, we were sitting in Radcliffe Yard. I said, you know, every one of these are all classrooms of women who did not get to do what we do. And I say, you cannot quit. You must continue. I mean it. I mean it. I mean, you cannot quit because you have an opportunity that they were not given, and you must do it to honor them. And I mean that quite sincerely. And you know, that's how I see the world. And I do have, like I say, in that way, I have a quarrel with American individualism. And I have a quarrel with people who think that, yeah, your education is something that you know, was given to you, and you can use it if you feel like you don't. If you don't feel like you don't use it, to me, you know, these educations are incredible. I mean, is what's involved in educating a kid is incredible. Once if you accept that education, that comes with a responsibility to do something with it. In my view, this is not a very popular view in the United States, but it is my view. And, my kids are very well aware of it, of course. And I will say anybody. I mean, actually, there are more people than you would think who actually also hold this view. It's just not the dominant. It's just not part of the dominant discourse, because the dominant discourse is all about freedom. It's only about freedom. It's not about responsibility. And I would say that freedom is great. Look, I'm into risk-taking. This book has a lot of freedom in it. I'm not talking about trotting along and, you know what I mean, kind of you just, you know, you're given your cart and you just pull it. You know, I'm not talking about that at all. But I think that should you be concerned with society, or are you completely independent of society? To me, no, of course you need to be concerned with society. Of course you need to be concerned with others, and of course you need to be concerned about the effect of your work on, you know, and of course you should be trying to leave the world a better place.
A call to arms for the young people, especially in the audience.
Yeah, and you guys are going to do it. You're going to do it. You're going to do. I have faith.
It was up to you anyway.
I have faith.
Absolutely. I want to mention that Gish, of course, talks about this idea of individualism versus interdependence in her wonderful book, Tiger Writing, which started as a lecture series at Harvard. So people should look at that too. It's a really wonderful, wonderful book. Okay, well, we are at the end of our evening. Gish, thank you so much to coming from Vermont. I'll just mention, I want to thank a few other people. Thank Sylvia Lanati from Peru, and thank you to Peru itself for hosting us on StreamYard. And thanks to my wonderful colleague, Aisha Ihan, who's in the background here, forwarding questions and being, you know, as wonderful as she always is. Thank you to Rebecca Smith, my colleague in the audience, and for University for helping us host these. So in our next, we have 3 each semester. This is our first. Next, Gish will know this person. We have Margot Livesey on March 15th. absolutely wonderful writer. I'm so looking forward to speaking to her and sharing her with you. And then we have our own Rebecca Smith, whose novel, The Ash Museum, comes out in May. We're hoping to be in person by then, but I think I might do StreamYard even if we are in person, so we can spread the word. And so I look forward to hearing Rebecca talk about that novel. So Gish, I'm the only person who's clapping you here, but I'm going to clap for such a wonderful, wonderful event. Thank you.
My pleasure, Carole. More power to you. And say hi to Marga, who is one of my dearest friends.
Yes, I know. All right. Well, thank you again. Thank you for attending Writers of Conversation, and we will see you on March 15th. Take care.
Bye-bye. Good luck all.